One thing that's clear throughout the book of Exodus is that God intends to be known, and He wants to be known as Lord. In chapter 5, when Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh to tell him that the Lord has sent them to say, "Let my people go," Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord? I don't know the Lord." Now, he's not saying, "I don't know the Lord, so please teach me more about Him so that I can have enough information to know whether I should obey Him or not." What he's saying is, I don't want to hear anything about any so-called Lord because I am the only Lord in Egypt. So to try to prove that He's the Lord in Egypt, Pharaoh makes the work of the Israelite slaves even harder. He tells them they have to find their own straw now to make bricks, but that they still have to make the same number of bricks that were required of them before. So the leaders of Israel complain to Moses and Aaron. "Thanks a lot," they said to them, "as if slavery wasn't bad enough. Now our lives are harder than ever." And Moses complains to the Lord. "Why did you ever send me to this place? You said you were going to deliver your people, but you haven't done anything at all." Well, in chapter 6, the Lord answers him, and He makes it very clear to Moses, "Pharaoh is not your Lord. I am the Lord. I'm the God who promised Abraham that I would live among my people in the land of Canaan, and I am the God who intends to keep that promise. I will bring Israel out of the land of Egypt, all of them. I will be your God. You will be my people. And when I do this, you will know that I'm the Lord." In chapter 7, he takes it a bit further. He says, "When I show my power throughout Egypt, when I bring my people out of Egypt, this will be the result." Verse 5, "The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." Verse 17, he says, "When He shows His power, Pharaoh himself will know that I am the Lord." And in next week's reading in chapter 9, he says, "When He shows His power in Egypt, the whole world will know that He's the Lord." So today in chapters 7 and 8, the Lord shows His power in 4 very intentional miracles. First, Moses and Aaron go into Pharaoh's court, throws down his staff, and it becomes a snake. And Pharaoh says, "So what? My magicians can do the same thing." So his magicians threw down their staffs, and they became snakes too. But the staff of Moses swallowed up the snakes of the magicians. This wasn't just a random miracle, by the way. It's important to know that Pharaoh wore a headdress with a snake on it, and this snake was the symbol of Pharaoh's divine authority in Egypt. So by doing this particular miracle, God is making it clear that He, not Pharaoh, is the true authority in all of Egypt. Next, the Lord sends Moses and Aaron to meet Pharaoh on the banks of the Nile. Now, the Nile River was sacred to the Egyptians because their entire lives depended on the waters of the Nile. And so they worshipped many different gods who were associated with the life-giving blessings of the Nile. The Lord tells Moses to strike the water of the Nile with his staff. And not only the river, but water all over Egypt turned into blood. And He did it right in front of Pharaoh, making a clear statement that He is the Lord, even over the sacred Nile River. But somehow Pharaoh's magicians did some kind of trick that looked similar, and Pharaoh hardened his heart again, and he refused to let the people go. Chapter 8, the Lord brings another plague, causing swarms of frogs to come up onto the land and filling people's houses. This was also very intentional because the Egyptians associated frogs with Hecate, the goddess of fertility and childbirth. And so frogs to them were considered a sign of life. So imagine what people thought when Pharaoh asks Moses to pray that the frogs would go away, and the Lord causes all the frogs to die, and all of the land of Egypt was filled with heaps of dead frogs, which were a sign of life to the Egyptians. The message was clear. The God of Israel is the Lord of all life. And finally, the Lord sent swarms of insects all over the land of Egypt, on the ground, all over people, on their animals, inside of their houses. But in the area where the Israelites lived, there were no insects at all, showing Pharaoh that the Lord was very much with the people of Israel. Pharaoh continued to harden his heart. He continued to refuse to let the people of Israel go. But as we'll see in next week's reading, the Lord continued to show His power and His glory. And with every new plague, the Lord shows Himself to be the Lord over Pharaoh, the Lord over all of the false gods of Egypt, and the Lord over all of life itself.